Good evening, and I extend my thanks to the Franciscan School of Theology and to Sister Juliet for inviting me to speak this evening. And thanks to all of you for joining us. It's great to have you with us this evening. The focus of my presentation will be how Franciscan pilgrimages can provide insight into personal and spiritual journeys, especially those of young adults. I'll be drawing from my experience as a pilgrimage leader, walking with both students, some from high schools, some from universities, and older adults since 2014. First part of my presentation, I want to look somewhat quickly at various Franciscan sites with which pilgrims connect and from which they can gain insights into their own lives. And we'll go through these 5 sites, 6 sites, 5 sites fairly quickly. Chiesa Nuova, Santa Maria Maggiore, San Rufino d'Arce, and La Maddalena, San Damiano and Grecio. But I want the focus of my presentation to be on a particular ritual that we do as part of pilgrimage called the Clare departure ritual. And I'm going to connect this with the concept of liminality. And if you're not familiar with liminality, I'll be explaining that concept in just a minute. Personally, my first connection with Assisi was when I was 15 years old in 1983. And my visit was part of a whirlwind tour of Europe with a very small group for my high school Latin class. And it was a quick day trip to Assisi, and I really did not know much about Francis or the Franciscan tradition at that point. But I do remember, however, recognizing that it was a very special and sacred place. It's just kind of fun to look at these old pictures too, because you can't even imagine people parking up next to the Basilica today. Things have changed quite a bit since 1983. Let's look at some of the important sites in the Franciscan tradition and ways that pilgrims gain insights from visiting these places. The first place I would like to examine is Chiesa Nuova, the new church. And tradition tells us this was the site of Francis's home when he was growing up. The first stone of this church was laid in 1615. We call it the Chiesa Nuova because it was new in 1615. The 2 decisive events are said to have happened at this place. One was Francis's vision of arms when he was a young man, when he has a vision of a room full of armaments, and he hears a voice saying he's going to marry a beautiful lady and lead a group of knights. And this was a time when Francis was wrestling with what God was calling him to in his life. But another important event at this location of Francis's home was when Francis's father imprisoned him in a cell in the house when he felt that Francis was going off the deep end and living a very ascetic life. But what I want to focus on, and what I often focus on with students, is Francis's relationship with his parents. Outside of the church, there's a statue of Francis's parents by Roberto Joppolo. If you look at the statue here in the middle of the screen, you can see Francis's parents, Pietro and Pica. They're holding hands. Looks like a good relationship. And yet you can see they're looking in different directions. You see the chains that Pica is holding in her hands because it was Pica who ultimately freed Francis from the cell in which his father was holding him. College students and others can often connect with the idea of a dysfunctional family. We all have mess of some sort in our families. And this encounter with Francis and his story, the story of his relationship with his parents, helps pilgrims to sit with, reflect upon, and process their own familial experiences. And I'm always struck when we visit Chiesa Nuova with college students, how when we go inside the church, they'll start journaling right away without being prompted to start journaling. There's a lot going on within them. And just another experience I had while on pilgrimage. Now, this was with an older adult. He was actually a college football coach. And it was after visiting Chiesa Nuova and talking about that visit later in the evening, this man broke into tears because he realized how much pressure he was putting on his own son to be a great football player. And he could relate with this story of Francis and his father. Next, I want to look at the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore, which is also the site of the bishop's residence. The church itself is in the bottom left-hand picture. This church was the first cathedral of Assisi. According to legend, it was founded in the 4th century by the second bishop of Assisi, but it has been changed a lot over the years. In 1035, the title of cathedral was transferred from Santa Maria Maggiore to San Rufino, but the bishop at the time still kept his episcopal seat at Santa Maria Maggiore. Three big events in the life of Francis happened here. This is where Francis stripped himself, renounced all his worldly possessions in 1205. Francis also stayed here when there were tensions between the mayor of Assisi and the bishop of Assisi, where Francis wrote another strophe that he added to the Canticle of Creatures about peacemakers and reconciliation. And Francis stayed here shortly before he died, probably late August, early September of 1226 at the bishop's residence. I want to focus on Francis's renunciation. Things had reached a boiling point with Francis's father, and the straw that broke the camel's back was Francis sold his father's horse in Foligno to get money to rebuild churches, to give to the poor. Francis's father first tries to bring him before the mayor, and the mayor doesn't want to have anything to do with this matter. He says it's a spiritual matter. The mayor says, go to the bishop. Francis is brought before the bishop, and he strips himself naked, hands his clothes to his father, says, no longer do I call you father, only God in heaven do I call father. While we're here at the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore, and we're at the bishop sala next to the church, we have a ritual in which we reenact Francis's renunciation of all his possessions. And pilgrims enter into the roles of Francis, of his parents, of the bishop, of the mayor. But this is a real opportunity for students and others to reflect on, what do I have to let go of in order to deepen my relationship with God? Are there masks that I need to remove to get to my true self? And students, consider their own attitudes towards materialism and what will ultimately bring meaning and purpose to their lives. Also interesting, you can see this upper left-hand picture taken, closer to COVID. But there's work being done by the current bishop of Assisi, excavations underneath the current bishop's sala, to find the door that Francis likely would have entered into when he would be visiting the bishop. And the current bishop is building a series of reflections around this door that they've excavated on surrounding the three events that happened in Francis's life there. So the bishop reflects on the door of decision, Francis' decision to renounce worldly possessions. He reflects on the door of reconciliation, the reconciliation that Francis facilitated between the mayor and the bishop, and a reflection on the door to eternity, because Francis spent time there near the end of his life. Interestingly, also, the body of Carlo Acutis is kept at the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore. You may have heard of Carlo Acutis. He's going to be canonized in the upcoming Holy Year. He'll be the first millennial saint. He lived 1991 to 2006. He was an amateur computer programmer who cataloged Eucharistic miracles, and died at a young age of leukemia. And again, he's the first millennial saint, being lifted up somewhat as a normal teenager. For me, he's pretty extraordinary, but it's interesting that young adults, college students, regardless of their backgrounds, their faith perspectives even, are very much attracted to the story of Carlo Acutis and are moved by his story. So a visit to Santa Maria Maggiore for college students and young adults, also often a very significant visit. Next, I want to talk about the chapels of San Rufino d'Arce and La Maddalena. These are two chapels associated with the main leprosarium below Assisi. This is all that's left of that leprosarium. Here at the site of San Rufino d'Arce and La Maddalena, there may be a 10-15 minute walk apart from each other. We reenact a leper ritual that is based on an actual expulsion ceremony researched by a former mayor of Assisi. So this is a ritual that would have been done to expel lepers out of the city walls of Assisi to take them down to the valley to the leprosaria. Here again, we do this ritual that's based on the historical ritual, in which roles are played by pilgrims. Somebody plays the leper, a priest. We join together as the townspeople, and we process. We process from the Chapel San Rufino d'Arce on the left over to the Chapel of La Maddalena on the right. And again, it's about a 10-minute walk. It's a very quiet procession, taking the leper symbolically out of the city of Assisi. It's a procession with a clacker, the sound that a leper would have had to make to alert people of his or her presence. So we're processing, and it's a very solemn, quiet procession, just punctuated only by the sound of this clacker, this clacking sound. And this ritual has a huge impact on students and older adults as they reflect on situations in which they have marginalized others, or they have witnessed others being marginalized, or maybe they've experienced marginalization themselves. And it's often a very profound experience for pilgrims. Next, I want to look at the Church of San Damiano, the monastery of San Damiano, that played such a pivotal role in the lives of both Francis and Clare. It was here in 1205 when Francis was 24 years old, praying before the cross in the Church of San Damiano, that Francis heard Jesus say, "Go rebuild my house, which is falling into a state of disrepair." It was also here at San Damiano where Francis was brought when he was very sick and near the end of his life. And it's here that he wrote the Canticle of Creatures, and a lot could be said about that. Clare was brought here when she was 18 years old and spent 42 years in prayer and meditation and service at the monastery of San Damiano. And there's many other stories that we could talk about in the Franciscan tradition that are associated with San Damiano. But for students, we emphasize reflecting on how we are called to rebuild God's house. In what ways are we called to rebuild the world around us? To what is God calling us? You know, often talk with students about we're not called to be just like Francis. We can gain insights into our lives and spiritual journeys from Francis. We're not called to be just like Francis. Francis himself said, I've done what is mine to do. May Christ show you what is yours to do. So we reflect on that sense of call and vocation while we're at San Damiano. Next, I want to look at the sanctuary of Greccio. And it was here in 1223 that Francis recreated the living nativity scene. And I think we often take the concept of the incarnation, which is our focus when we go to Greccio, thinking about God becoming human. We often take this concept, I think, for granted. I'll be teaching, about incarnation, and it just becomes kind of, I don't know, just a lecture maybe on the incarnation. But I had a real eye-opening experience when one of my Muslim students stopped me and asked, why would God ever do that? She was so earnest. She's like, why would God ever become human? I'm like, this is a great question. And it helped me to reflect on the significance of the incarnation. But at Greccio, there is the Chapel of the Nativity that was built in 1228, the year of Francis's canonization, in the place where Francis celebrated Christmas in 1223. And in this cave, we find a 14th century fresco that's at the bottom of the screen. I love this depiction of the Nativity. On the left side is Francis recreating the Nativity scene, and on the right is the Nativity scene from the Gospel of Luke. I like it because it's not sanitized. It's not a sanitized depiction of the Nativity. Now, oftentimes we see, depictions of the Nativity with Mary kneeling next to the manger with folded hands, which are, can be beautiful depictions, but here we have a breastfeeding Mary. It's a very real depiction of the Nativity. At Greccia, with the students, we emphasize finding God in the ordinary and in the mess of our daily lives. I think oftentimes we think we have to look elsewhere. We want to have a great spiritual experience to find God, to see God. But at Greccia, we talk about God in the everyday. We talk about the need to adapt our vision, our lenses, to see God's presence in the world and in our lives, including the messiness of our lives. I'd like to move on now kind of to focus on one aspect of the pilgrimage that we do as part of Franciscan Pilgrimage Programs, which is this Clare departure ritual. I've been studying and exploring this Clare departure ritual that we do along with Dr. Alexandria Egler. And we've been looking at how pilgrimage in general and the Clare departure ritual in particular help pilgrims to navigate liminal experiences. So you might be asking, what are liminal experiences? So I'm going to talk about liminality and liminal experiences, and we'll come back and talk specifically about this ritual that we do as part of pilgrimage. The word liminality comes from the Latin word limen, which means threshold. So we're going to be talking about threshold moments in our lives. As I began exploring the concept of liminality, because I had heard about the concept in various contexts and different people's talks, I discovered that the concept had deep roots in the studies of the French anthropologist Arnold van Gennep, who lived 1873 to 1957. In his seminal book, The Rites of Passage from 1909, Van Gennep describes rites of passage as ceremonial patterns which accompany a passage from one situation to another, or from one cosmic or social world to another. Van Gennep looked at rites of passage across cultures around the world. But significantly for our purposes, he subdivides rites of passage into preliminal rites, or rites of separation, liminal rites, rites of transition, and post-liminal rites, rites of incorporation. But it's these middle rites that we want to focus on, the liminal rites or rites of transition. These are what are of most important and interest to us here. Participants of these liminal rites, Van Gennep notes, they're in a neutral zone. They're between two worlds. This is where liminality occurs. They're going through a rite of passage. They're in this middle experience where they're not in their old life, they're not in their new life. They're not in the old stage, they're not in the new stage. They're in between. Another important scholar for understanding liminality is British anthropologist Victor Turner, 1920 to 1983, who built off of Van Gennep and further explored the concept of liminality. Turner famously states, liminal entities are neither here nor there. They are betwixt and between the positions assigned and arrayed by law, custom, convention, and ceremonial. In my own words, liminal experiences are experiences between states in life, when one is no longer in the former state and not yet in the new state. Liminality itself, Turner explains, is not a state. It's like a dynamic process in between the former state and the state yet to be. Similar to Van Gennep, Turner compares such experiences of liminality, compares them to being in a no man's land, to being in a neutral zones, compares them to being both living and dead. He compares them to being in the womb with the idea of gestation and birth. He further describes a liminal experience as a moment in and out of time. Significantly, Turner notes that liminal experiences often involve, quote, the doffing of masks and the stripping of statuses, the renunciation of roles, the demolishing of structures. Furthermore, liminal experiences constitute the realm of pure possibility and are accompanied by processes of growth, transformation, and the reformulation of old elements in new patterns. In other words, liminal experiences involve letting go of the past while simultaneously presenting great opportunities for growth, creativity, and transformation, including in the realms of personal and spiritual development. Another important aspect of liminality, according to Turner, is the communitas that develops by those who share an liminal experience. This communitas is more than the word community conveys. In his own words, Turner's own words, this communitas involves a communion of equal individuals and an essential and generic human bond. My own words, this communitas might be described as a sense of human interconnectedness that is accompanied by disintegration of social distinctions amongst those sharing the experience. In other words, roles are stripped away as all enter into the liminal experience together. I now turn to explore the contemporary spiritual understanding of liminality. As I do so, I want to demonstrate how pilgrimages themselves are liminal experiences that help pilgrims to navigate the broader liminal experiences of life. As stated earlier, liminality applies to those experiences when we are in between. One is not in the old state of being and not yet in a new state of being. Such experiences can be extremely challenging. They involve a loss of control and can be accompanied by fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. And while liminal experiences, and sometimes liminal experiences, we choose to enter into them. For example, I can choose to leave a job and I'm in between jobs, or sometimes we're forced into liminal experiences. I might be fired. While liminal experiences have many angst-inducing dimensions, they are also exceptional opportunities for new perspectives, growth, creativity, and transformation. Richard Rohr states it is in these transitional moments of our lives that authentic transformation can happen. Otherwise, it is just business as usual and an eternally boring status quo existence. According to Rohr, liminality shakes us out of our day-to-day stupor so that we can see the world from new perspectives. Schultz and Sandage, two scholars who study in the areas of theology and psychology, also note that such ambiguous and dark experiences provide opportunity for great spiritual growth. They state, entering the crucible of liminal space and tolerating the accompanying darkness can lead to revelations that are scary and painful. Yet the transforming process can promote a more secure attachment with God and the differentiation of self that allows for greater spiritual and relational intimacy. Liminal experiences involve letting go of the old self to get in touch with what James Fowler calls the deeper self. In spite of societal voices that tell one that the discomfort, unknowing, and confusion associated with liminal experiences are bad and to be avoided at all costs, society would say, don't get out of liminal experience, get sure footing in your life. One needs to hold on to the liminal space and to stick with its uncomfortability to reap its benefits. Growth occurs from the process of going through the liminal experience, not avoiding it. So, how are pilgrimages themselves liminal experiences? Pilgrimages can be liminal experiences in that they enable pilgrims to distance themselves from their day-to-day lives and to enter sacred space and time. In the case of Franciscan pilgrimages, pilgrims step out of their familiar surroundings and enter the sacred places where Francis and Clare lived and ministered. This out of the norm space is a liminal space in which liminality can be experienced. In regard to sacred time, pilgrims step out of what I call the normal tyranny of time in their day-to-day lives. They step out into a situation in which they often lose all sense of time, in which they lack a sense of control. We often tell pilgrims, participate, don't anticipate. We're telling them, let go of the need to control time and keep track of time. Let go and enter into liminality. Another dimension of pilgrimages that relates to liminality is the communitas that is experienced during pilgrimages. People let go of normal roles and social positions to enter a leveled experience of togetherness. Recently, I led a group of pilgrims from my university, and the group included our university president, two vice presidents, other important university figures, and just friends of the university. I'll be honest, I was a little scared about living with my boss for 10 days and leading him through a pilgrimage experience. But it was very interesting. I was amazed how within an hour of their arrival in Italy, the pilgrims, their titles and their status this kind of disintegrated and went away. There was no longer a hierarchical status. There was just the common liminal experience of being a pilgrim. In addition to the communitas that is experienced during pilgrimage, both the rest and the walking that occur during pilgrimages can help add to their liminal nature. The crashing of pilgrims arrive in Italy and the time change and the travel. The crashing upon arrival is often a letting go and an entrance into a liminal time and space. Walking that is part of pilgrimage also helps pilgrims to enter into liminal space. And this is when some of the most powerful experiences of pilgrimage happen. So rest that is not the norm of people's lives. And this walking that's part of pilgrimage often generate opportunities for creativity. In order for pilgrimage to truly constitute a liminal experience, one must leave one's former life behind. One must let go of one's projected understanding of self in order to become something new. This letting go of one's old life or former life before pilgrimage is very difficult in our technological age. What I want to explore is that while pilgrimage itself constitutes a liminal experience, the liminal experience of pilgrimage can occur within the broader liminal experiences of one's life. So someone might be going through a liminal experience in their life in general, go on pilgrimage, which itself is a liminal experience. What I'm trying to say is that liminal experience of pilgrimage helps them to process and navigate the broader liminal experience that's going on in their life. But how do pilgrimages do this? By stepping out of their day-to-day routines and by entering into unfamiliar spaces and communities through pilgrimage, pilgrims are presented with opportunities to get in touch with and reflect upon their current life experiences at home. The pilgrimage itself presents pilgrims a liminal place, a physical space different from their normal lives, in a liminal time apart from their day-to-day routine, in which they can reflect upon and gain new insights into the broader liminal experience in which they find themselves. So I now want to turn to that one ritual that is part of pilgrimage that can help pilgrims to navigate their broader liminal experiences. The Clare departure ritual created by the Franciscan Pilgrimage Programs is an experience of liminality that can help pilgrims navigate broader liminal experiences in their lives. The Clare departure ritual is a ritual in which pilgrims enter into and reflect upon Clare's surreptitious departure from her home and family on Palm Sunday, 1209, when she abandoned her life of nobility to join Francis in his embrace absolute poverty at the Porziuncola in the valley below Assisi. In this ritual, pilgrims walk part of the journey that would have been similar to the path that Clare would have taken. The ritual starts near the Cathedral of San Rufino, where we think Clare's house was. And pilgrims play the roles of Clare and her companion, because the legend of St. Clare says she had a companion that walked with her. Pilgrims also enter in the scene more directly by being torch bearers. We often, almost always, do this ritual at night. And the ritual walk is accompanied by song, with that we sing between stops that we make as part of this walk. And I'm going to describe those stops briefly. But given that Clare and her companion are in capes, and given that there's torches and there's music as we're walking through the streets of Assisi, we often draw attention. And sometimes, though, outsiders, people just in Assisi, tourists, whatever, come and join us. They'll start joining Clare's departure walk with us, which I think adds to the power of the ritual. I want to talk briefly about the stops that we make during the walk. At the first stop, which is up near the Cathedral of San Rufino, we reflect on the goodbyes and the hellos that Clare would have to say, or at least mentally process in her own life. Saying goodbye to her family, her home, her friends, her noble way of life. Thinking about the hellos she would be saying to Francis and his brothers. But here we think about the goodbyes and hellos we've had to say in our own lives. We process to the next stop. We're walking down from the Cathedral of San Rufino, we're walking down to the city of Assisi. And we think about Clare's nobility and family status. There were upsides to Clare's nobility, but there were also some downsides. Noble women lived restricted lives enclosed within boundaries of their own homes and the customs of nobility. There were things like arranged marriages, and they didn't have juridical guarantees once their spouses died. So Clare was leaving this prestigious but confining world. And we stop to think about the privileges that we have experienced in life, and we consider the ways that social circumstances may have confined us. We go on to stop number 3, thinking about Clare's awakening to the message of Francis, her identification with the message of Francis. Francis's deeds would have been known through Assisi, and word would have spread about what Francis was doing. And we think about what has Clare heard, what has drawn her to the message of Francis, and we stop to reflect on how the Franciscan tradition has influenced our own lives. Proceeding down to the city of Assisi, kind of at the midway point, and we stop near where Francis's father's cloth shop would have been. We consider crossing borders. By this point, Clare would have crossed the boundary between the majors, the nobility, and the minors, the less than, the others. And we picture Clare stopping near the shop of Francis's father. Here, the poor worked dyeing cloth, far removed from the nobility that Clare was used to. And we think about what it means to cross invisible borders between the privileged and the marginalized. And we stop and consider how we might reach out to the marginalized in our own lives. Stop 5, getting down lower into the city of Assisi, where you can overlook the valley below Assisi. We think about discernment and making choices and the consequences of those choices. We consider questions that may have been running through Clare's head. This is probably the last point she could turn around, go back home. Was she thinking, could I even get back inside if I wanted to? Would I be able to return after I've made all these choices? Have I made the best choice at this point? And we think about times in our life where we might have thought about reversing courses. Then we come to the gate, Porta Moiano. The upper right-hand picture is a picture of Porta Moiano at night. This is a gate within the city walls of Assisi that Clare probably would have passed through. And we stand before the gate and we consider, did Clare pause to think about her decision one more time? That Clare's going to she would have entered into this gate, which is really a physical liminal space. It is a threshold. And there would have been doors on both sides of the gate. Clare would have entered. The doors behind her would have been shut. The doors in front of her would have been closed. The guards up above would have asked her what her business was. We think the bishop helped her to get through this gate. But when Clare was inside this gate, And the left-hand picture is a side looking up from inside the gate. Clare was neither in her old world nor was she in the new. Turner might state she was betwixt and between. And as we stand within the gate, we ask pilgrims to recall significant transitions they have experienced and decisions they have made in their lives. We ask them to ponder the consequences of those transitions and decisions. And we pray for the grace to embrace the creativity and new life brought about by crossing through the liminal experiences in our own lives. We walk through the gate and we can gaze upon the valley below us. And we think about how Clare, if she would have been looking out, it would have been just dark space. She wouldn't have been able, dark, wooded, swampy area. She would not have been able to see the Portiuncula. She was walking into the unknown. And we have the pilgrims who play Clare and her companion carrying a torch, walking down into the dark. They cross, go around a corner, and they go out of our sight. But today, as Clare walks down to her new life, we can look behind us and see the Basilica of Santa Chiara. Something new came from Clare's crossing through that liminal space. Clare could never have imagined that an entire movement in this basilica would come from her trust in God and her journey through liminality. As pilgrims, we think about how we're called to follow God's will through the liminal moments of our lives, even though such experiences are challenging. In doing so, we can rebuild God's house and use our lives to heal and transform the world, just as Francis and Clare did. So, I believe the Clare departure ritual can help pilgrims as they navigate the broader liminal experiences of their lives. As she made her journey and stood within the gate, the Porta Moiano, Clare stood in a moment of fear, uncertainty, and lack of control. Yet this was a moment of transformation and exciting new beginnings for Clare. Clare's experience of liminality can provide insight to pilgrims who enter into the Clare departure ritual as they seek to navigate their own broader liminal experiences. The Clare departure ritual, as part of a Franciscan pilgrimage, is a particularly poignant way that pilgrimage can provide insight into navigating broader liminal life experiences. By participating in this ritual, pilgrims place themselves in the footsteps of someone who had a very vivid and profound liminal experience 8 centuries ago. In stepping out of their own lives and by entering into and reflecting upon the stages of Clare's journey, pilgrims gain insight into the various aspects of liminal experiences, the pain and excitement of leaving old ways behind, the fear and the second guessing, the importance of both entering into and persevering through liminality, and the life-changing creativity and transformation that can occur when one goes through a liminal experience. The moment of standing within the liminal space of Porta Moiano provides pilgrims with a physical experience of liminality that may give them new perspectives on the role of liminality in their own lives. By entering into the experience of Clare, pilgrims are given the opportunity to reflect on the significance of their own experiences of liminality, both past and present. And by reflecting on Clare's own transformational journey, pilgrims also receive inspiration to keep moving through their own liminal experiences instead of evading or seeking to escape from them. In short, the liminal time and liminal space created by the ritual provides the opportunity for deep reflection. I want to wrap up with just a couple of quick personal stories of pilgrims. It was a college pilgrim who had participated in this Clare departure ritual. And after we had crossed through the gate and we had done our reflection, the pilgrim college student said, as Clare was transformed and was a new person when she walked through this gate, we too as pilgrims are called to be renewed as we go through our pilgrimage. We're not to return the same as when we came. She was talking about liminality. It was really that student's perspective that spurred my own interest in exploring liminality further. But also interesting, after a pilgrimage in April, there was a reunion dinner of pilgrims that I attended, and they had no idea I was looking at liminality. They had no idea that I was going to be presenting on liminality. And one of the pilgrims at this reunion dinner shared she had been in a toxic, unhealthy relationship. And she eventually got out of the relationship, but it was very painful. And once she was out, she said she carried a burden. She said she felt a need to atone for something. And she goes, but it was the Clare departure ritual that really struck her. And that after she walked this ritual way, she felt a peace like she had never known. And she said she sometimes questions if she's too much at peace. But she said she came to the insight after this ritual that God has more in store for her than she or her family could ever imagine. But she had to go through the liminal experience. So I hope I've demonstrated how connecting with the lives of Francis and Clare can provide pilgrims, especially student pilgrims, with insight into their own personal and spiritual journeys. In particular, I've shown how pilgrimage can help pilgrims to navigate liminal moments in their lives. And I think Franciscan pilgrimages in particular have much to offer a world in general and young adults in particular. Young adults are hungry for what the Franciscan tradition has to offer, and pilgrimage is one very important way of connecting young adults with the tradition. So thank you. Thank you for listening.